Thank you, everyone who is joining us. We have Dan Oshinsky, and he is going to be presenting on 4 newsletter models. I will wait to do like a formal introduction so people don't have to hear me talk about how amazing you are twice. But the ground rules for this webinar are basically use the chat, which is one bubble for chatting, and use the Q&A, which is 2 bubbles, if you see those down at the bottom, for asking questions. That way we can make sure that your question gets asked. If possible, we might bring you on live, but no pressure. If you'd prefer it to be a text question that one of us reads aloud to Dan, we can do that as well. And we will get started in just a minute here. How's the weather in New York today?
Gray. How's the weather in Florida?
The opposite.
Yeah.
Hot. It's actually gotten hot. Nice sunny day after a few days of rain, though. So I hear you on gray. We had a few gray days before. So is it 3? It's 3. Okay. I will become official right now for everyone who's watching. Welcome to our 4th session, I believe, of Newsletter Fest. We kicked off this morning, and we have Dan Oshinsky talking about 4 different newsletter models. I'm going to give you a few housekeeping tips, just in case you're just now joining. What we have is 2 little thought bubble type things at the bottom that you usually see in messaging apps. One is one bubble. That is for chatting. So that's great, and we'd love to have you chatting in the chat. We also have 2 bubbles, which is Q&A, and that will help you ask a question that we actually notice and does not get lost in the chat. And then we can make sure that Dan gets to answer that question during this session. Newsletter Fest, our intention is to turn webinars on their sides and not have just dull presentations that people don't engage with. We would like you to feel like you have the best access you can have to these presenters that we are lucky to have with us. So that means questions are super valuable to us and to you. And we'd love to do everything we can to empower you and ignite your newsletter strategy throughout the festival. A couple of things that Seth is going to drop in the chat right now. One is a link to a contest we have going on right now for winning a free year of Curated. That means quickly launching a curated newsletter in our software and then getting people to vote for you before the deadline. It's like tax day deadline, April 15th at midnight. You better have your votes in. And then we also have newsletters of the year. So vote for your favorite newsletters. And that is live also until midnight Eastern on Thursday. So without further ado, we've got our housekeeping out of the way. Welcome, Dan Oshinsky. I'm so excited you're here. Let me give people just a little background on you. He is the former editor of newsletters at The New Yorker and at BuzzFeed. And we had an interesting conversation about how that all came about. He owns and operates Inbox Collective right now, which is a newsletter consultancy business. And basically, Dan was getting a lot of questions about how to run newsletters and to do better content for newsletters, or to get higher open rates, or to use newsletters to grow revenue or to grow an audience. And he realized that he was the resource that he didn't have as he learned more and more about email and newsletters. So we have him here today as a consultant of newsletters. He's worked with lots of people, and he has some brilliance to sprinkle down on all of us about the 4 different newsletter models that he's going to introduce to us today. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks for having me. Also, no pressure. I appreciate the setting the bar low for this. This is great.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Exciting to be here. Hope wherever you are, you guys are safe, doing all right. Let me go full screen, and no, let me hit the actual button, because this is more fun when you hit the actual present button instead of the share button. Let's talk about some business models. Let's talk about newsletters, and specifically newsletters for creators. This is something that's been on my mind for a while as I've built up an audience through not a newsletter, my work through Inbox Collective. When I first started, my focus was really on publishers and nonprofits. And in the last year, year and a half, really seeing a lot more folks in this creator space come online and think about, well, how can I launch a product? So the last few months, I've been working with another reporter. Her name is Alex Hazlitt, and Alex and I have been interviewing folks, trying to understand really this kind of creator ecosystem, how it intersects with newsletters, what are the opportunities out there. So I want to talk through some of these opportunities today. Want to start with a kind of a big picture thought, though, which is really there's never been a more exciting time to be a creator in the newsletter space, as long as you identify the right business models first. If you are in this space and you are trying to match a really interesting newsletter with the wrong model, over and over again, I've had these conversations over the past year, folks who have tried to force a square peg into a round hole, trying to make sure you align your creative strategy, the stories you're trying to tell, your growth strategy with your monetization strategy. Those things are crucial to your long-term success. So I want to talk today about some of the models out there and how you can match what you're trying to do with revenue opportunities that might make sense for you. Few things first as we kind of run through this today. One, I want to talk about how we got to here in the creator space. How did we reach this point exactly? What rules apply for my newsletter strategy? I've been working in this space for almost a decade now and seen certain rules that apply for publishers, for nonprofits, for brands. A lot of that stuff trickles down to you. I want to make sure we don't ignore those. I want to make sure I share some of those big picture lessons with you. I want to talk about the 4 big models that we're seeing for creators. And lastly, I want to talk about the monetization opportunities that pair best with each model. And we're going to save plenty of time for Q&A, here at the end. But also as we're going along, we don't have to save it for the end. Raise your hand, drop something into the chat. We will do our best, by we, I mean me, and Ashley and Seth, to get these questions answered for you. Please, please, please do ask away. Anyway, let's get rolling. Briefly about me, as mentioned. So I see Ron in the chat. Hey, Ron. I was the director of newsletters at BuzzFeed for about 5 years, was the first newsletter editor there, then built the team, became director of newsletters, took over the same role over at the New Yorker. 2 very different sorts of companies. When I was at BuzzFeed in 2012, really no newsroom, but very few newsrooms had someone in charge of newsletter strategy. This was something that people did part-time, or really for a lot of organizations, there was no one in charge. So I stepped into a very kind of unusual role, kind of created it actually. BuzzFeed and I had some interesting conversations. They reached out and said, we like how you think, pitch us on this kind of job. And I'd already always been interested in newsletters and the opportunity there. Talk about why in a little bit. Built that role at the New Yorker was very different. They had realized that newsletters were the #1 way they took casual readers and turned them into paying supporters of the New Yorker, and needed someone to help steer the strategy and guide things there. So I stepped in as the first director of newsletters there. As Ashley mentioned, I now run Inbox Collective. I am an accidental consultant. I didn't mean to do this. I had a really good job at the New Yorker. I wasn't looking to go anywhere. And when I built this thing, not a newsletter, what I realized was there were lots of folks who needed my help. And so set out to do that sort of thing. Oh, and for the folks who are looking at the screen, wondering what these other images are, over my time at BuzzFeed, launched all sorts of interesting products, news, DIY, of course, the world famous This Week in Cats newsletter. At the New Yorker, was really proud of the humor newsletter, among many other things that we launched there. And I do write Not a Newsletter, notanewsletter.com if you're interested, where every month I share tips and ideas and resources for how to write better emails. It's free, open to anybody. All right, let's get to the good stuff. Let's talk about how did we get to here exactly. This is, from my vantage point, at least the 3rd wave of email growth in the 2000s. A lot of people are excited about email. Email is the hit thing of the moment. But this is the 3rd time this has happened, this millennium. In the early 2000s, email was really an extension of a personal blog or brand. So as Blogger and WordPress took off, we saw email kind of rise as a companion to get people often just back to your most recent blog posts. Monetization was really, really limited. Basically, it was just ads. That was the primary thing. There was a little bit of affiliate stuff in there as well, but it was mostly advertising. If there was any sort of monetization strategy at all, On the news side of things, newsrooms didn't really focus on email. Everything was pretty much just an RSS feed. Here's our most recent stories sent out at various times of the day. There were a couple original newsletters that did break through at the time. Daily Candy was one of the most famous. It's funny to look at an email like this now and imagine, for many reasons. One, this was really a pre-iPhone era, so emails were designed in a way that was more desktop friendly. Now you wouldn't really see emails that look probably like this. This would have made a lot of sense though in 2008 in the pre-iPhone era. Politico Playbook and what Mike Allen did, that was one of the first newsletters that really broke through, that built a relationship and built an audience. Still, email was in very, very early days. It had been around forever, but a lot of organizations, brands, creators were just starting to use it. In the 2010s, things started to change, and TinyLetter was really the driving force behind this. I'm going to guess that just about everyone here at some point had a TinyLetter or subscribed to a TinyLetter newsletter. They were super easy to use. They were free. Kind of anyone could do them. So a lot of folks, as blogging started to shift and morph into something new, people said, well, I'm going to take kind of that bloggy type attitude, that voice, and bring it over to email and try things there. We started to see more investment in ads, with native ads in particular. Affiliate links became a bigger deal. Newsrooms started to focus on emails for curation purposes, for traffic. We're starting to see all sorts of cool new original products. The Skim was one of the big winners of the early 2010s. Quartz invested heavily at BuzzFeed. We were really big into email. Next Draft by Dave Pell on the left, and Friedman Weekly, which is still going, one of the early, really forerunners to a lot of the personality-driven newsletters we see today. This was one of her early newsletters, looked completely different then compared to now. But you had these really interesting sorts of products that were coming out, really pushed by TinyLetter, MailChimp, a few other providers in the email space. There weren't a ton of email providers at the time. You really didn't have a lot of choices if you were sending out emails. Aweber was there too. Things were pretty early on. But now, in these last 2 to 3 years, we've really seen an explosion in, one, email service provider options. There are now dozens. There is, frankly, a dizzying array of choices for creators, for newsrooms, for nonprofits, for brands. If you're sending out emails, there's a lot of choices. It's confusing to navigate and decide what makes sense for you. The good news is there's also been a huge rise in these no-code kind of tools that allow you to build an audience, grow an audience, monetize an audience in lots and lots of different ways. On the newsroom side, I'm seeing lots of folks focusing in particular on email because it's tied back to reader revenue, as we're seeing more news organizations focus on subscription, membership, a donation strategy. And that's actually started to trickle down to creators, as creators have thought about stuff like subscriptions, memberships, and donations as potentially a primary source of revenue. Certainly many newsletters of note to mention. The New York Times has had a lot of success with The Morning, the Wall Street Journal with their 10-point newsletter. Morning Brew and The Hustle stepped in, kind of taking over the mantle from the Skim and bringing that onto another level. 1440s in that space too. Girls Night In, which is an amazing product. And a lot of these are regional reporter-driven things like Heated or Popular Information. So we've had some interesting sorts of an interesting little evolution of newsletters, from very basic, very, very simple products that were traffic drivers to more tiny-driven products, personality-driven, to now really robust products that are served across lots of different tools with lots of different monetization opportunities. Now, I've had this really kind of interesting perspective on this over the last decade. My first newsletter, Tools for Reporters, was launched in the midst of this TinyLetter wave back in 2012. That actually helped me get the job at BuzzFeed, where as more publishers were investing in original products, curation, driving traffic, native ads, we really pushed hard into that space. At the New Yorker, as we started to see the pivot towards reader revenue with publishers and with creators, I was there as we were trying to figure out how can we use newsletter to drive that reader revenue, to convert a reader from someone who likes our work to someone who pays and supports our work. And from 2019 on, I've gotten to work with a lot of you and a lot of publishers, a lot of creators through Not a Newsletter, through Inbox Collective. And actually, Not a Newsletter even started as a TinyLetter, if you look down there at the bottom, delivered by TinyLetter. Also a fun thing when I was putting together these slides, recently, I realized that these emails were totally not can spam compliant. The address down there at the bottom, 930 2nd Avenue. Here's how seriously I took my not a newsletter at the start. That email address, or that address, is the address for the Chinese food restaurant down the street that I really, really like. That's how seriously I was taking not a newsletter at the start. There wasn't even like a real address on there. Anyway, things change. When I started not a newsletter, I thought, maybe I'd get a couple people to sign up for this thing. 400 people signed up in the first 3 days. Things changed. It became a whole business. Anyway, let's talk about some rules that have applied over the years and what still matters for your email strategy. So this is still, to me, the biggest thing. In fact, if you take nothing else away, if you hang up and, right after this, don't leave, please. But if you do, and you get this, I'll be happy and satisfied. Email is still one of the best ways to build relationships. So there isn't a single entity, there isn't a single algorithm. Nobody controls email the way that a social network or that a search engine is controlled by an algorithm. Email is this amazing, amazing tool because, as all of you know, if you can get a reader's email address, I have a chance to build a relationship with them for years to come. And when I talk about building a relationship, I really mean build a relationship, especially if you're a creator. Start a conversation. This is something I've done since day one, really, of Not a Newsletter. I endorse it for everyone. Somebody signs up for my newsletter, they get an email right away from me that says, all right, you signed up for my newsletter. You're clearly interested in newsletters. Do you have a personal newsletter or work on newsletters for your job? And what are you struggling with? Write back to me. I actually want to hear from you. I know it seems kind of crazy. I write back to every single person who writes to me. I start a conversation. I share resources. My goal when I got into this was to help. And this is an opportunity for me to help people right off the bat, build a relationship. I want them to get to know me. Also, for the type of work that I do, where ultimately I'm trying to convert some of these readers to support my work through, paying for consulting from me. If they know me, if they like me, if I've helped them from day one, they might be the types of people who turn around later on and decide to support my work. Ask questions, get to know your readers, start a conversation, and really utilize that one-to-one nature of the inbox. It's a rare tool where you can actually start a conversation and start a private one. What I find is the things that people are willing to tell you over email, it's very different than what somebody might say in a comment thread on LinkedIn or on Facebook. They're willing to share things. They're willing to be open and transparent. So ask them questions, get to know them, actually write back to them, utilize that resource. It's an amazing, amazing way to use email. This photo right here, this actually really shaped, this photo actually helped really shape how I think about email. This is a photo of some former colleagues of mine at my first job in San Antonio, Texas. This is the newsroom at KENS 5, the CBS station in San Antonio, Texas, back in the 1980s. The three folks at the bottom, that's Chris and Fred and Deborah. They at one time were responsible for the most watched local newscast in all of the country. At 6 p.m. in the 1980s, 60% of TVs that were turned on were tuned in to watch these folks deliver the news. I like to think it was because of the suits, but really it was because they had this amazing rapport with their audience. I got to be there many, many years later as they were starting to push into digital. And San Antonio, for folks who haven't been there, that's a big, small town. It feels like a really small community, just happens to have a few million people living in it. And there's lots of parades and events. And so our news anchors would be out in the community. Sometimes I'd be out there too. And I was always amazed at how often people would walk up to our anchors or our staff and just start talking to them as though they'd known them for years. And afterwards, I'd always ask, did you know that person? They seem to know you. The conversation got pretty animated. And the response was always, no, I don't know them, but they know us because we're on in the living room. When you wake up in the morning, you're watching TV. Well, we're one of those voices while you're having breakfast or we're having a conversation. You're eating dinner, we might be on in the background. You're going to bed. We're on before you go to bed. They know our voices. They know our routines. They know our banter. They know us. They feel like they know us because we're on in that space. And for me, that's always been really formative because when I think about the inbox really is this living room too. It's this personal space that readers say, I'm going to let, family and friends and maybe a handful of brands or creators or individuals like you in. You have to work really hard to win them over. You also have to work really hard to keep them and continue to earn their trust. The more you actually treat the inbox as the space that, they're going to let me in again today. I have to prove my worth again today. Every time I send an email, I have to prove that I belong in that space. The more you treat your emails like that, the more you start to think, is this email good enough to be sent out? Is this valuable enough? Is this worthy of their time? When every place I've worked, I always try to think, is this going to be worthy of that living room, of that personal space? And as you try to shift beyond that broadcast conversation to a real one-to-one sort of conversation, you can really use email in an exciting way. Another rule here, start with a building block or tool or two. This is something we developed through my time at BuzzFeed. There are 4 real building blocks that we noticed of emails. Identity, service, utility, and personality. So let me go through these one by one. Identity is who you are and what you care about. At BuzzFeed, this actually partially came about because of this idea that I pitched on my first day at BuzzFeed. I pitched 3 newsletters: a daily newsletter, a weekly newsletter covering the best magazine-style journalism, and a newsletter called This Week in Cats, which everyone made fun of me for, but then grew into a newsletter with 150,000 readers and super high open rates, and people loved it. It did really well because people identify as cat people. Being a cat person is part of who you are, a cat person or dog person. In fact, it did so well that dog people got mad we didn't have a dog newsletter, and we had to launch a dog newsletter to satisfy the dog audience. I'm building newsletters around who you are. I'm a cat person. Or this newsletter on the right, Dense Discovery, which is built around this idea of, do you care about the intersection of technology and design and the impact that these things have on our lives? If these are things that make you, you, well, these might be newsletters for you. Think about service. This is the content and stories you want more of. I want to know where to eat. I want to know what to spend time with. At the New Yorker, this newsletter called The New Yorker Recommends did so well because readers told us, I want to know, what books to read, what movies to watch, what TV shows to enjoy, what podcasts to listen to. There's so many things out there. Help me understand what the best stuff is. Great. We'll bring you more of the stuff you want more of on a day-to-day basis so you can get the most out of your day-to-day, out of your life. Providing content around service is often a really, really great strategy. The flip side of that is thinking about utility. So it's the content and stories you need more of. I need to know, for instance, if you live in Honolulu, I need to know what is happening in the news locally, what's happening with schools, with COVID, so I can make the right decisions for me and my family. Well, you might subscribe to a newsletter like Honolulu's Civil Beat's Morning Beat. If you work in the media space like I do, you might subscribe to a media newsletter like Splice Frame's amazing newsletter out of Asia, out of Singapore, that helps me understand kind of what's happening in journalism in other parts of the world. These are things I need to know because I need to know what's happening locally, what's happening in my industry, so I can make the right decisions for me. Utility newsletters are just awesome too. And of course, personality. This is really what spawned this creator movement. Newsletters built around a specific voice. These have been around in news spaces for a little while. We're seeing lots of new offerings. Punchbowl, John and Anna and Jake, what they've done, taking their brands from Politico and launching a brand new newsroom built entirely around newsletters. It's really, really exciting, delivering daily news on politics 3 times a day. We're seeing this with a lot of newsletters built on platforms like a Substack or Review or Curated or Button Down. There's a lot of these out there. This is one from Delia Kai called D's Links. That's amazing. A little bit of personality and voice and perspective on what's happening in the media landscape from the perspective of someone who works in it. When you're building a newsletter, you always want to think about, what's my building block? Is it identity? Is it service? Is it personality? Is it utility? You might have one. A really good newsletter might even have 2 or 3. And that's something that's always shaped how I think about newsletters. Do I have a building block there that really helps inform the work that I'm going to do? As I think about other rules, there's still more that I've learned over the years. When I got to the New Yorker, I started to think more about this concept of jobs to be done. For those who aren't familiar with the framework, it's this idea that for everything you do, there should be a really specific purpose. And this really shapes how I think about building a specific newsletter. Well, all right, I'm thinking about relationships with how I use in my onboarding series. And I'm thinking about, am I sending stuff that's worthy of the reader's time, making sure I'm worthy of that living room, of that inbox. I'm thinking about the building blocks. My newsletter is built around personality and utility, for instance. But then I'm thinking about, what does the newsletter actually look like to actually be good? And that's where jobs to be done comes in. For every section of your newsletter, there should be a really clear and specific purpose or job. There are really 5 big ones that I see: informing a reader, connecting with the reader, engaging with the reader, entertaining with the reader, driving action for a reader. I'm not going to go into detail on a lot of these, but I will say at the end, I will share a worksheet. As you think through and use the worksheet, what I'll just say is, look at your newsletter and think, for every part of my newsletter, every section, is there a really clear purpose? Is there a really clear intent? Do I know what I'm trying to get a reader to do with this section, what I'm trying to give them with this? So all of these are, and by the way, David, identity, service, utility, and personality, all of these are going to get shared afterwards too, as we go forward. The slides, everything, so you can dive in. So these are kind of the big picture rules that I've seen over the years. But now let's get to the fun part, which is, well, what does it mean now for creators? What else are we layering on top of this? Because creators are a really interesting and unique kind of newsletter. Newsletter creator. The creators do something a little bit different. And so as I started to look through this space, I saw, especially in the last year and a half, a lot of conversation around the tools and not enough around what people were actually trying to do with their newsletter, what kind of buckets these newsletters fell into. And so I mentioned earlier, I've been working for the last couple of months with another reporter. Her name's Alex Hazlitt, used to work at Mashable, and she's awesome. We've been interviewing folks and trying to map this creator ecosystem. Not done yet. Going to be coming out with our report. Actually, it's going to trickle out over the next couple of months, but the first batch of stories is going to come out in May. As we've gone down the rabbit hole, there's just so much more to cover. I wanted to share some of the high-level stuff that we've learned so far, though. We've been trying to understand what's out there and which business models pair well with each. And we've come up with these 4 big models for now. There might be more. I actually think we're on the verge of adding a 5th category, but I'll stick with 4 for the moment. What we see is kind of these big 4. Reporters, analysts, experts, and writers. I've mentioned these kind of as, as a singular, but these can all be collectives too. These can all be things that, a creator newsletter doesn't have to be just a one-person operation. It might be a small team, a small original publication of creators working together to make a newsletter, do something great. Let me talk through these 4 for a second. The reporter model is, as you would expect, really focused on original reporting. We're curating news for a really specific audience. Now, this could be around a region, local news, regional news, state news, could be around a specific topic. So a couple that fit this model: local news newsletters like Detour Detroit, which is just awesome, the Charlotte Ledger, 2 very different models there. Popular information, the 340B report, which covers the 340B federal drug prescription plan. Some of these newsletters are very broad and cover regions. Some, like Popular Information, cover a big topic, progressive politics. Some, like 340B, cover a really, really niche topic. There's not a lot of people on this call, actually, I'll wager there's no one on this call who cares deeply about the 340B federal drug prescription plan, but there are folks out there who work in hospitals, who work in pharmacies, who work in pharmaceutical companies, who work on Capitol Hill, who care deeply about it and want reporting and access around it. There's this analyst model, and this is really the Stratechery model. For those familiar with what Stratechery is, amazing newsletter. And when I think about these, it's almost, for those of you who've thought about this idea of like, so many startups are like, we're Uber, but for X. A lot of newsletters are now like Stratechery, but for X. These are newsletters really focused on helping readers dive deep into a super niche topic. So they're usually, but not always, a B2B kind of thing. Stratechery is one. A media operator by Jacob Donnelly goes super, super deep on the media landscape. Seed Table by Gon Sanchez, that goes really in depth on the European tech market, which is super interesting, very specific. Hoop Vision, which does an amazing job of covering college basketball and the kind of the inner workings of college basketball. If you subscribe to it, you probably won your March Madness pool. If you didn't win your March Madness pool, you should subscribe. Next year, you will probably win it. He had Loyola Chicago doing very well this year, and Houston too. Anyway, really, really deep dives into topics, helping you understand what does this topic mean, what's happening, from people who have deep expertise on another subject. Let's help you understand kind of the landscape, the lay of the land, so you can go out and make the right decisions for yourself, whether you're investing in a space, whether you work in a space, whether you're making bets on a certain space, whatever it is. Analysts kind of help you figure these sorts of things out. The expert model is super interesting because these are newsletters where you find someone who has super deep subject matter experience and expertise on a topic, and they help you figure out, how to do more on a topic that you care a lot about. Often these are geared around helping you improve your skills or your knowledge. So like this on the left, for those of you who use Google Sheets, Ben Collins has this amazing newsletter called G Sheets Tip. He is the Google Sheets guru. And if you want a weekly tip in your inbox about how to use Google Sheets as best as possible, like he's the guy. He knows everything about it and super, super smart in that space. You care about, you're in the SaaS space and you care about reducing your churn. Val Geisler's Fix My Churn newsletters for you. You care about the business of hip hop. Dan Runcie and Trapital, it's the newsletter for you. The Workout Today, what Peter and Keely have done is really, really cool, taking their expertise to help people find actionable workouts that they can do 3 days a week at home. Really useful. A lot of fun too, especially for folks who not yet comfortable going to the gym. Great newsletter for you. These are awesome newsletters as well. Deep expertise on a topic. We're gonna give you practical tips, things to do, advice, ways to move forward with whatever it is you care a lot about. And then there are these writer-driven newsletters. And in fact, I think by the time we publish this piece, and even today, I think this is actually the wrong title for this category. I think this is more of an artist category because I'm seeing not just folks who are writers, but illustrators, artists, musicians start to push into this space. These are newsletters typically focused on a unique voice, perspective, using newsletters to share your art with your readers. And we have lots of cool examples. Drawing Links by Edith Zimmerman is just basically a newsletter with cartoons and illustrations from her day. Brass Ring Daily is an awesome newsletter from Kara that really goes deep on ways to reach and strive for big goals. Men Yell at Me is awesome. Dense Discovery is an amazing newsletter. I mentioned it earlier. Lots and lots of cool products in this space too. And what's fun is, as we really start to dive into these spaces, what we've seen is there isn't a one-size-fits-all revenue model. I think if there's one thing that really bothers me or that worries me about the past year and a half, it's that a lot of the conversation has been super focused on subscriptions as kind of the ultimate goal for creators. And I think it's just one of many opportunities in this space. I think subscriptions are great, but it's not necessarily the thing that everyone should strive to do. And if you try to, as I mentioned, really force a subscription model into a newsletter that's not quite subscription worthy, you start to see, poor results. I think the newsletters, and I don't think this is a particularly outlandish claim to make, but the newsletters that are going to succeed in the next 3 to 5 years, the ones that make it through this next wave, are going to be the ones that invest in a few different revenue models. I've seen this in the news space where newsrooms, frankly, over-relied on just a single revenue stream for far too long. And it led to really terrible outcomes, really dire consequences for the news industry. And any business that relies on just a single way to make money, I think is going to struggle in the long run. I would really encourage you to think about a few different options. And as I mentioned earlier, because of this no-code movement, it's never been easier to integrate your newsletter with tools that help you make money and drive revenue. Deb, you asked a question, so I want to go back for a second. You asked, are these newsletters based on organic or curated content? This is actually the examples I've shared here today. All of these are pretty well. Detour Detroit is a mix of original reporting and curation. 340B's all reported original. Seed Table and a media operator. Both do rely a little bit on outside sources, but a lot of it's original analysis and thought. These two here, all completely 100% original content from experts in the space. And these here at the end, all original. Now, there are, and funny you mentioned curated content, because one of the models we've been thinking about adding is there might be a fifth category, which is kind of the curator. And I do think that would make a lot of sense in this space. It might be something that we add as we go forward with the project and continue to interview more folks. A lot of these newsletters are focused on original stuff, but often it's a mix of the two. Ron, you have a question about newsletters that shifted from one business model to another. I'm going to get to that in a second because Trapital is one of my favorite examples of this. Let's talk about different opportunities for revenue here. So I think I mentioned earlier, subscriptions, they do work for a lot of these different models, pretty evergreen. Donations and memberships are also on the table there too. I'd highly recommend and endorse the Membership Puzzle Project. They do amazing work and have done amazing research into a lot of these business models. Highly endorse you check out their work. They go super deep into the advantages and disadvantages of some of these models and help explain, what is a membership-driven business, what's a subscription-driven business. Highly endorse you check out those sorts of things. These are great, but there is some, downside to something like a subscription-driven business, and that you are limiting the number of people who might see your content. You might be limiting your audience. These work really great for people who've already built a really big audience, or people who have a very niche and narrow kind of audience. For folks who are growing an audience, they don't always work as well. If you're thinking about memberships or donations, maybe there's a community aspect to that too, how you tie back and provide value to your community beyond just your reporting, your writing, the stories you tell beyond your newsletter. Affiliate content works well with a couple of these newsletters, really with the exception of the reporter sort of model. For experts, they work really well. I built an expertise around a certain topic. Great, I'm going to tell you about the tools you should use, and there's an affiliate tie-in there. For someone like writers, your affiliate tie-in might be tied with something like books. You're selling books, you're promoting a book club, you're trying to drive people to buy certain products. These do work really nicely too. Events work particularly well for a lot of the reporter-driven models, especially the local newsrooms. As you're thinking about building a community, how do you move folks from newsletters to an in real life sort of setting, especially hopefully as we go forward in 2021 to some things happening back in person again. Events work really well. They also work well for conferences and for experts. Ben Collins, who I mentioned earlier, had one of the earliest digital conferences that I saw. He actually, I'll be writing about this in a couple of weeks, but had planned, totally without knowing about the pandemic, in March 2020 to launch a huge conference called SheetsCon, all about Google Sheets. Just so happened that the whole world moved online at that moment, and it was actually a huge accelerant for his business. Experts can build an audience and a community around this sort of thing. I think what we're seeing actually with Newsletter Fest is a great example of this too. A lot of interest and a lot of folks caring really deeply around newsletters. Great. There are experts and people who can come to the table and bring folks together to learn on a really interesting sort of subject. E-commerce and merchandise. This works really well with a number of different models, whether you're selling your own content, your own books, original work, art, or merchandise. Even a lot of local newsrooms or a lot of individual publishers will sell some sort of merch, t-shirts, swag, tote bags, these sorts of things. Not necessarily the biggest source of revenue, but there is money to be made there. Consulting, coaching, teaching, online classes, whether these are, taught through like accelerator programs, taught live or on-demand sorts of classes. These pair really well with these, expert sorts of models. Freelancing works particularly well, of course, for writers and artists, and there's lots of opportunities there. Ads and classifieds work well with all four of these. I wouldn't say that I would recommend anyone should go 100% all in on ads, but I do think ads can still be, in particular when done well, integrated really nicely with your newsletter, when you're really thoughtful about how to integrate native advertising and picking the types of advertisers that appear in your newsletter. I do think advertising classifieds present some really interesting opportunities for monetization. And of course, these workshops, paid talks for experts, for analysts, for people who have deep expertise, there are people willing to say, look, I'm willing to pay real money to learn from you in person. These have existed for a long, long time, but huge opportunities there. Ron, to your point, your question around newsletters that shifted from one model to another. I mentioned Trapital earlier from Dan Runcie. Dan was someone who launched a newsletter around the business of hip hop. Super interesting story, built this audience, does amazing reply writing every single week, and initially built it as a subscription product, but realized that his business model was actually built more around being an expert, and that the money that he was going to make in the long run was going to be built around consulting. And that by limiting his audience, by having a subscription product, it meant that he wasn't able to continue to bring in new readers, expose them to his work, and actually go out and build a consulting business. So he pivoted. He, basically went and said, I'm not doing the subscription business anymore, refunded everyone's money, made the newsletter open and all to everyone, and now is focused on consulting and then advertising as kind of a secondary tier of revenue. It is possible to do. Luckily for Dan, he realized pretty early the money to be made for me, but for my business to succeed in the long run, the work I actually want to do is this kind of one-to-one sort of stuff The newsletter is a way to funnel people towards me, get people exposed to my work, learn from me, and then they'll turn around and say, how can we work with you? And having a model where he's an expert with a consulting business made a lot more sense than an analyst with a subscription business. Let me share one more example here too before open up the floor to Q&A. I figure, if I'm going to share an example of anybody here, why not just do me? So not a newsletter, an inbox collective. Here's kind of how it's gone for me over the last 2+ years. I launched this thing in January 2019. Didn't really intend for it to be a business. It was really an accident. There's a lot of thoughts that a lot of folks ask me, how big do I have to get before I can monetize? Does it have to be huge? And the answer is actually, it really doesn't. When I went back and looked at this, 1,976 subscribers is when I emailed my list and said, guys, I'm leaving the New Yorker and starting a consultancy. Do you want to come work with me? And I remember telling my wife that day, like, this really better work because I'm quitting my job to do this. It wasn't a huge list, but the feedback I've gotten from my audience was, we want to work with you. We're excited to work with you. I knew there were going to be clients out there. And even as I've grown this thing, it's still not huge. Now, that's partly because I publish as a Google Doc, and it's almost impossible to find. It's like a secret society you have to join to enter. But still, it's grown very slowly over the years. 3,000 at the end of 2019, 5,000 at the end of 2020, just past 6,000 this past week. The open rates, are really strong. 49% of people on average open, 41% of people who open the newsletter click. Really, really good. But not a huge audience, but it works super well. You would assume, actually, based on kind of what I do, and this actually probably would have been in my guess at the start, that a subscription product might make sense for me. And I think if I had just focused on providing content for one quadrant of my audience, if I just wrote about newsletters for newsrooms, I might be able to do a subscription product. And if I was going to do it, I'd charge a pretty penny for my content. I wouldn't be charging $90 a year, $100 a year. It'd be several $100s a year to get access, because it'd be a strictly B2B kind of play. But the weakness is, one, I really like doing this consulting work. I like working one-on-one with teams. I like the challenge of that. I like learning from new teams and new challenges. And limiting my audience means that I can't reach a lot of new people who might be excited to work with me. It also limits my ability to work with people who can't afford to pay for my work, who I still want to help and still want to support. And so instead, I've tried to build my business around leveraging a couple different opportunities. So just to give you a sense, this is 19 months of content, 19 months of Inbox Collective now. I launched the newsletter a little more than about 26 months ago, but Inbox Collective has been around for 19 months. And here's kind of how we've shifted, how I've shifted the business. So consulting is still the number one driver of revenue for me. 84% of my revenue comes from consulting. Audits of people's emails, programs, coaching, project work, retainer work, this sort of thing. Paid talks, about 12%. That had been a bigger share before the pandemic, when I did a lot more travel, a lot more in-person sort of stuff. Advertising is a really small share of the business. Not something I focus a ton of time on, but I do have some advertising partners in Not a Newsletter. Affiliate business is something that's grown a ton. I'll talk about that in a second. And freelancing, small chunk of the business. I've written basically one freelance piece over the past 2 years, trying to focus really on stuff that I think I can own and do myself. Now, as you all think about your sort of business and trying to take away some of these lessons, one is, I want you to make sure you understand, if you're a creator, one, what is my business model? Am I not just a creator, but a reporter, an analyst, an expert? Am I, oh my goodness, I'm blanking at the end. And then my 4 models, a writer. This is what happens when you go and you talk for 45 minutes straight. You forget some of the answers. Which one of these models is the one that works best for you? You want to be thinking about, where does my revenue come from? Where do I expect more of my revenue to come from? And then based on that, where do I need to put some of my time and attention? One of the things that we've learned from doing this project, from interviewing so many creators, is they get excited about a particular business model. I really want to go out and do this, but think, oh crap, like I don't have the time. Where does the time come to actually go and do this work? It's just me, or it's a small team of folks. I don't have the same resources. How do I get to this point where I can build a new revenue stream for me? For me, the revenue streams that I expect the next 18 months to grow: affiliate, workshops and events, particularly in person, teaching. This could mean, classes that I teach, either live or on demand. These are things that I'm really excited about. So it means I have to do a couple things. One is I have to focus more, to build an affiliate business, I have to grow my audience. If the audience is small, it's gonna be tough to make that sort of business work. I need to continue to focus on building relationships with both the creators out there, with agencies, with people who are building tools. So that way I know which tools are the right ones to recommend to my audience. And I actually need to do something kind of strange. I need to scale back some of the work that brings in the most revenue for me, so I can go and focus on things that I think have an opportunity to grow in the long run. Short-term sacrifices for long-term sorts of gains. As we really see the creator space evolve, we're going to see more people trying to understand, all right, here's the buckets that I fit into, here's the model that works with me, and here's the different sort of business models out there that match really, really nicely. We're going to see these spaces evolve, and we're going to see people have to make difficult choices about, where do I invest my time in first? What do I get started with, going first? And where, as I grow, do I invest next, so I can continue to grow my business and use this newsletter to drive revenue and drive growth for myself? Two last things before we get into some of the questions. I mentioned very briefly, like literally in 15 seconds, this idea of jobs to be done. This is something that built through Not a Newsletter. Share this with you all later on. It's in Not a Newsletter, but we share the slides. We'll share the resource as well. This is a very simple worksheet that's going to talk you through different sorts of jobs to be done. As you're thinking about your newsletter, highly recommend go through the sheet, make sure you understand who you're trying to reach, how are you uniquely suited to serving them, and for every part of the newsletter, what am I trying to do? What's the goal? Am I trying to educate, or one of these bullets makes sense for me? I'm trying to identify trends, go in depth, explain the basics. I'm trying to engage. I'm trying to drive an action. Use this worksheet to help you figure out how to make your newsletter as good as possible. For those who are also building based off of you have a website in particular, you're building an audience there. I've built this list of 25 ways to grow your email program. This is really, really focused on, you have a site, you're trying to convert readers from your site, but there are some opportunities I list in there in terms of paid acquisition and some offline channels as well. Hopefully a few things in here that you can take away and use as you try to grow your strategy. All right. Notanewsletter.com if you're interested. Dana at Inbox Collective if you have any more questions. This is a lot of me rambling. Let's get to the good stuff, which is answering some of these questions here in the chat. Ashley and Seth, you want me to just fire away and go through these kind of one by one?
Sure. If anyone wants to ask theirs out loud, they can, but I think that you are great at just reading them and responding. So maybe we save that for clarification needs if you have a follow-up question.
Sure. Let me run through these from the start.
Yeah.
David asked, do you think the under 30s Gen Z younger folks will have the same relationship with email? Okay. So this is the question I've been getting basically since I started at BuzzFeed, when people are like, young people don't read email. And what we found was young people read email just fine, because they get into the workspace and they get a work-related email, or they're at their university and they have a work-related email. Even, really young people, teens now, actually are getting more into email, because this past year from the pandemic, they had to figure out how to communicate with their teachers. And so they all had to get email addresses. And so as I've talked with more folks who are really actually working with younger sorts of audiences, even they're seeing growth, because this is something that people really have to use. You kind of have to exist in order to exist on the internet. You kind of have to have an email address. They're easy to use. They're really simple. The thing just for the younger folks is they have a high expectation for the quality of content. They don't want emails that suck, basically. They want your emails to be really good. They want your emails to show up and be super valuable. So they're not going to put up with any crap. And if your emails are lousy, if they don't provide real value, they're just going to delete them, or they're going to unsubscribe. So just remember, you're playing to an audience that has a high expectation for content. They want to be entertained. They want something that's going to be useful. If you do that, you're going to be just fine. My old friend John Stupart. Hey, John, over in South Africa. Hi. How do you see these four categories evolving as readers get email fatigue and newsletters start to multiply? It already feels like the Substacks of the world have created newsletter overload. Excellent question. So in the media space, this is, I think, the number one fear. People are freaked out about this idea that like, are we going to hit some concept of peak newsletter? And what I've seen so far is, I don't really think that's really the case. I do think there is some long-term worry for me about subscription overload, how many subscriptions people will pay for. But in terms of newsletter overload, the general public isn't like, if you work in a newsroom, and I've worked in several of these over the years, reporters in particular subscribe to a ton. Creatives, marketers tend to subscribe to and oversubscribe to too much content. The people who are, in a room like this today are probably the people who are also like super active on a platform like Twitter, which tend to be for power users. And so I do see in the media space this concern because people say like, I subscribe to 100 newsletters. The majority of the public doesn't actually behave in that way. They respond, or they might subscribe to a handful of products that are super valuable to them, but they're not going to subscribe to 1,000 things because, to be frank, like they're used to emails being pretty lousy. They only want stuff that's going to be unusually useful for them. I don't think it's something we have to worry about a ton, but we'll see as things change over the years, how this kind of space evolves.
I have a thought on that, and
please.
I think that aligns with what you said to the first question, is that it's anything that is saturated then becomes an issue of, but is it good? Because I will open, I don't care if my inbox is jammed with things, I will open from someone I know is delivering something I really want. So I think that's the challenge, is fighting for the earning, right? You have to earn that open and that click.
Yeah, 100%. If the content isn't great, if it's not super useful, you're going to have a real challenge in the long run. You really have to focus on, am I providing something of such high value? And with mobile phones too, it's made it even harder because you're not just competing against other emails in the inbox. You're competing against that thing that the group chat just sent you. That's an amazing link that someone wants you to read. That notification that just popped up on your phone. You have a lot of competition. Is your stuff good enough to stand out? And that's why, having those built-in blocks, thinking about like, what makes me me? Oh, I have a personality-driven newsletter that's tied to utility. So it's my voice covering a B2B sorts of topic that like you care deeply about. You're going to make time for this because you want to know what's happening in your industry and you want to hear about it from me. Cool. Like that makes for a really, really good newsletter. But understanding that, you do have to earn that space. You have to earn your place in the inbox. That's something that all of us are going to struggle with. Make your stuff great.
We might have to go into a speed round because I do have Russ Henneberry right at 4, and that gives us 9 minutes for 6 questions.
We can do this. John Weir, do you think that having an archive of newsletter editions on your homepage where the email capture form resides is a value add? It depends. It depends on how, evergreen your content is. For a newsletter like mine personally, to be honest, not really. Like I do have an archive. I'm starting to go and pull out some of the best like features and stuff I've written and publish those as standalone sorts of things. That's coming next, but not for everybody. Now, I will say you should have at least a sample of your newsletter somewhere. If someone's signing up on your newsletter, I want to see what it looks like. I would love to see a sample version of it. That's really helpful. For stuff that's a little more evergreen, it might make more sense. It might be useful to have. Good question. McKenna. Hey, McKenna. What's your advice for managing ads and their placement effectiveness when you don't get a say in the client or ad that is placed? I work for a student newsroom and our ads are managed by a separate department. So, all right. In this case, for you out there, out in the Midwest, McKenna, with this sort of thing, it's a little tricky. You can look at different sorts of tools out there that manage ads, something like Letterhead, for instance, which was built for local newsletters, might make a lot of sense for what you and your newsroom are doing. And that might help alleviate some of the kind of the pain points. This is a tricky one. I'd say in general, a lot of this is just having an honest conversation with the ad department around, setting expectations. What are our newsletters good for? Trying to align your editorial goals with the advertising goals, even doing stuff like I've done in the past, like putting together a one-sheeter of, here's what we know about our audience. We know demographics, we know data, we have, certain audiences we're trying to reach. Here's what we know about these folks. They can try to align their goals with yours. even little steps like that might help try to alleviate some of these pain points. Amy, is it possible to go straight to subscription? Is a free newsletter requirement no matter what? It is absolutely possible to go straight to subscription, but it really, the cases where I've seen where it works, there's two cases. One is where the person who's starting the product or the people starting the product already have a big audience. You come to the table and you already have, 500,000 people who follow you on Twitter. You're the kind of person who can leave your newsroom and get press coverage about it in like the New York Times. Okay, those folks can go straight to subscription and start from day one. The other example are folks who have a little bit of budget and can say, I'm going to start a product. Maybe it's a more niche B2B kind of play, but I can go out and spend some money to acquire an audience and bring people in. And I'm willing to, if the value of my subscription is $100, $500, I might be willing to spend $20 to get a new subscriber because the return is going to be there in the long run. But it's really hard to do. In general, I'd say start with even a trial, 3 months free, just so people get a taste so you can build an audience before you switch over. That tends to be a safer sort of route. But typically, to be perfectly honest, building a newsletter audience is a 2-year process often. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. It depends on what you're trying to build. But be patient. It is hard to go straight to monetization with something like subscription. Dave wanted to ask, from the perspective of 2 years out at the New Yorker, how happy are you that you went out on your own? How does your personal income compare? I don't want numbers, just want to know if it's better or worse, a lot better. So my goal when I left for the New Yorker was to beat, at some point in the next couple of years, was to beat my New Yorker salary. And I did it last year in 2020, which was a thing that was really fun to say and fun to do. I love doing the work that I do, to be perfectly honest. It's super fun. Consulting suits me really nicely because I like solving weird little challenges. I love when my clients come to me and we're like, we don't know how to do this. And I go like, oh, actually, I haven't figured that out either, but let me go and figure out the answer. Like getting to tinker and play with it and come back to them and be like, I figured it out. Here's the game plan is super, super fun. Consulting turns out is just an awesome way to do a lot of things, solve problems, but also a really cool way to get people to pay you to learn more. I love learning. I love learning new stuff, and I get to do that a lot with consulting. Brad, what platforms for newsletter creation do you think have the most promise? All right, I'm going to give a cop-out answer here and say that when we publish this big project, it's going to come out starting in May. We're going to have a lot more on the kind of tools and creation kind of front. It's a super complex space. There's a bunch of things that I'm pretty excited about, but I don't want to give the half-hearted answer here. And then I'm always wary of being like, oh, my favorite tool is X. And then everyone's like, cool, Dan said X is the thing. Everyone, we're all on X now. I'm like, no, wait, I didn't understand your situation fully. I'm going to give the cop-out answer and say, sign up for Not a Newsletter. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to have an email. It's like, hey, good news. The tools and resources thing that I promised is actually here. It's going to go into way more depth and give you a better answer than I'm going to give you today. Last thing, what moves are you seeing from the larger platforms when it comes to newsletters? Do I worry about them? All right. So my general feeling on this is I actually am really excited that there are a lot of people trying to compete for creators specifically. I'm really excited that more people and more of these companies are investing in newsletters. This is typically a good thing for creators in the long run. It's a little messy right now because it's confusing as hell when you're trying to pick between 37 different email service providers and what's the difference between these sorts of things. But in the long run, what it means is that everyone is going to have to build out a better suite of products. You're going to have to say, is this newsletter tool good enough? Does it provide the analytics, the data, the segmentation, the automations, the feature set that you're going to need to succeed? And I think what we're going to get is, for creators, we're going to get more tools that are built that operate on a playing field that's going to work for you. You're going to get better terms and better deals. You're going to have to share, the costs are going to come down. You're going to get better resources to build out and grow your products. And I think you're going to see even some of these big guys that are entering the space really come in and say, we're willing to invest resources into tools, into learning, into new startups, because we want to be a force for good. I think it's going to be a good thing in the long run. It's going to be a little messy in the short run, but it's going to be a good thing in the long run for creators.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt, unfortunately. We have a few more questions, but we have to bounce off of this one and start the next session. So Dan is in our Slack community. If you want to go join that, if Seth can drop that link again. I appreciate you presenting today and giving us all such great ideas. And I apologize to everyone. We actually wedged in some sessions today because we had to reschedule them, so we didn't have the buffer time that we normally had. But everyone, huge thank you to Dan. I'm so excited that you're here, and I look forward to you sharing your newsletters with us in the Newsletter Fest Slack community so that we can follow those and engage with each other and keep supporting each other's success. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to leave the session. If you're joining me in the next one, I will launch it as soon as I